Before we speak of Thor, we must step into the world he was born into. A world that was never quiet, never safe, and never finished being made. Imagine a time before time, when there was nothing but Jörmungandr, the yawning, endless void. In the north, a realm of biting cold and rime frost stretched into infinity, Niflheim, a place of darkness and mist. In the south burned Muspelheim, the land of fire, a place so hot and fierce that even the gods would later speak of its fires with reverence and fear. And between them, where the frost met the flame, the first drops of water formed, the first sparks hissed and steamed, and creation began. From that melting ice rose the first giant Ymir, and from his great body would eventually be born a race of beings older and wilder than the gods themselves. The Jotnar, the giants, the first children of chaos. When the gods came into being, they looked upon Ymir and his offspring and saw danger. The Aesir, led by Odin and his brothers Vili and Ve, slew Ymir, and from his enormous corpse they shaped the world. His blood became the seas, his bones the mountains, his skull the dome of the sky. From his eyelashes they built a wall around Midgard, the realm of men, to keep out the giants. Even the clouds were said to be Ymir's brains, drifting across the sky. And so, the world was made from death, a place already soaked in conflict before the first sunrise ever touched its lands. This was the world Thor was born into, not a peaceful paradise, but a hard, dangerous battlefield where order was fragile and chaos always lurked just beyond the horizon. And the gods knew they could not sit idle on their golden thrones, for the giants would never forgive them for Ymir's death. They would never stop plotting revenge. This tension, this constant threat, is what gave rise to Thor's purpose. Thor was the son of Odin, the All-Father, and Jord, the personification of the earth itself. It is said that from the moment he drew breath, the air crackled around him. He grew faster, stronger, and wilder than any of the other divine children. Even as a boy, he would wrestle with creatures too fierce for the other gods to tame. His laughter was said to shake the rafters of Asgard's halls, and when he grew angry, the sky itself seemed to darken. Thor was unlike his father. Odin was the god of wisdom, of runes and hidden knowledge, a god who would sacrifice his own eye for insight, who would hang himself on the world tree for 9 days to discover the secrets of magic. Odin was patient, calculating, often cruel in his pursuit of what must be done to stave off the end of all things. Thor was not patient. Thor was not subtle. He was action. He was the arm that struck when Odin's plans called for war. If Odin was the mind of Asgard, Thor was its beating heart. The weapon that made Thor's name feared across the 9 realms was Mjolnir, the hammer that always returned when thrown, the hammer that leveled mountains, the hammer whose strike echoed as thunder. Its forging is one of the great tales of Norse myth, a story that begins, as many Norse tales do, with mischief. Loki, the trickster god, once cut the hair from Sif, Thor's golden-haired wife. To make amends, Loki traveled to the dwarves, the finest smiths in existence, and asked them to forge treasures worthy of the gods. From their forges came Sif's new hair, spun from gold so fine it grew like real hair. But the dwarves also made other gifts, a golden boar, a ship that could fit in one's pocket, and Mjolnir. The handle of the hammer was shorter than intended, due to Loki's interference, but its power was unmatched. Mjolnir could crush any foe, and with it Thor became the protector of Asgard, the shield of Midgard, and the eternal enemy of the giants. But Thor was more than a warrior. To the Norse people he was also a god of fertility, of rain and growth. When the fields needed blessing, it was Mjolnir that sanctified the land. When couples married, it was Mjolnir that hallowed the union. Thor was the god who brought storms, but also the rain that nourished crops. He was destructive, yes, but also life-giving. Picture Thor riding across the sky in his chariot, pulled by 2 immense goats, Tangrisnir and Tangjastr, Toothnasha and Toothgrinder. Sparks fly from their hooves, thunder booms with each turn of the wheel, and lightning arcs from Mjolnir as Thor stands, red beard shining, hair whipping in the wind. To the people below, these storms were both awe-inspiring and comforting. For every peal of thunder meant that Thor was out there, somewhere, defending the world from things too monstrous to see. And there were many monsters. The giants of Jotunheim were cunning and relentless. Some were as large as mountains, others so ancient and filled with magic that they could reshape the land itself. It was Thor who fought them again and again, keeping them from overrunning Midgard. He was the gods' most powerful warrior, and also, paradoxically, the most beloved by humans. Unlike Odin, who could be distant and manipulative, Thor was straightforward. You knew where you stood with Thor. He did not play games. He fought for the people. But Thor's strength was not just a weapon against his enemies, it was also a source of endless challenge. The giants hated him more than any other god, for he had slain so many of their kin. And yet, curiously, there were times when Thor visited their halls. One such visit would become one of his most famous adventures. There came a day when Thor, Loki, and two mortals, Jolfi and Roskva, set out on a journey into Jotunheim, the realm of the giants. The path was long and harsh, and they faced many dangers, but Thor relished the chance to confront his foes on their own ground. After days of travel, they came to the great hall of Útgarða-Loki, a giant known for his cunning and his power. Útgarða-Loki welcomed them with a sly smile and offered them hospitality, but with conditions. He proposed a series of contests to test the strength of the visitors from Asgard. If they were as mighty as they claimed, surely they could best the giants in fair competition. The first to step forward was Loki. Boastful as ever, he claimed that none could eat faster than he. A trough was brought forth, filled with meat, and Loki devoured it with astonishing speed. But his opponent, a giant named Logi, was faster still, and when the contest was over, Logi had not only eaten the meat, but also the bones and even the wooden trough itself. Loki stepped back, humiliated, while the giants laughed. Then Jolfi, the swift-footed servant, boasted of his speed and agreed to a race against a giant named Hugi. They ran across the hall, Jolfi's feet barely touching the ground, but Hugi was already waiting for him at the finish line. Twice more they raced, and twice more Jolfi was defeated. The giant's laughter grew louder. Thor's temper was rising. He could not bear to see his companions mocked. He stepped forward and demanded a challenge worthy of his strength. Útgarða-Loki smiled, as though this was what he had been waiting for. The first test was a drinking horn. Thor was told that anyone who wished to prove himself in Útgarða-Loki's hall must empty the horn in a single draught, though most guests could do so in 3. Thor raised the horn to his lips and drank deeply, draining mouthful after mouthful. And yet, when he paused to breathe, he saw that the level had barely lowered. With a growl, he drank again, longer this time, and still it was not empty. On the third attempt he drank until his lungs ached and his face turned red, but when he slammed the horn down, a small amount still remained. The giants roared with laughter, and Thor's hands clenched into fists. The next challenge was to lift Útgarða-Loki's cat from the floor. A simple task, Thor thought. But when he bent to grasp the cat, it stretched impossibly long, its back arching higher and higher until it nearly touched the ceiling. Thor strained, muscles bulging, veins standing out, sweat pouring down his face, and at last he managed to lift just one paw from the ground. The giants howled with glee. Finally, Útgarða-Loki brought forth an old woman named Elli and told Thor that his last task was to wrestle her to the ground. Thor stared in disbelief. Surely this was an insult. But he agreed, determined to redeem himself. They locked hands and Thor pushed with all his strength. Elli did not budge. He strained harder, gritting his teeth, but Elli held firm. Slowly, inexorably, she began to force him downward until Thor was driven to one knee. The hall erupted with laughter, and Thor, humiliated, could only rise and accept his defeat. But the next morning, as Thor and his companions prepared to leave, Útgarða-Loki revealed the truth. None of the contests had been what they seemed. The horn Thor had drunk from had been connected to the ocean itself, and he had drunk so deeply that he had caused the tides to fall. The cat had been no cat at all, but the Midgard serpent, Jörmungandr, who encircles the world, and Thor had nearly lifted him completely out of the sea. As for Elli, she had been no ordinary woman, but the embodiment of old age, and no one, not even a god, could defeat her. Útgarða-Loki admitted that Thor had frightened him so badly that he would never dare face him again. And though Thor's pride was wounded, he also felt the stirrings of something deeper, the knowledge that his power was even greater than he had imagined, and that the battles to come would test him as never before. As Thor and his companions left Jotunheim, the air seemed charged with storm. Thor turned back once, raising Mjolnir, and hurled it at Útgarða-Loki's hall. But in that moment, the hall vanished and they stood alone on the plain. Thor's jaw tightened. The war with the giants was not over. It would never be over. And with that, Thor gripped the handle of Mjolnir, climbed into his chariot and rode back toward Asgard, the sound of thunder rumbling in his wake, a warning to any who would threaten the realms under his protection. But Thor's story does not end with Útgarða-Loki's illusions. If anything, that strange night in the Hall of the Giants was only the beginning, a warning of what was to come. For in that moment, Thor had been shown a glimpse of his destiny, the Midgard serpent rising from the sea, its coils stretching across the horizon, a battle so vast that the very foundations of the 9 realms would shake. Thor had nearly lifted the serpent once, but one day he would face it for real. And on that day there would be no tricks, no illusions, only a fight to the death. This knowledge haunted him, but it also drove him. Thor was not a god who ran from fate. If the Norns had woven a thread that would end with his death, then so be it. Until that day came, he would fight again and again to hold back the darkness for as long as he could. And there was much darkness to hold back. The Jotnar never ceased their attempts to breach Asgard's walls or to strike at Midgard. Whenever Thor heard of giants gathering, he mounted his chariot and rode to meet them, lightning flashing with every strike of the wheels against the sky. Many sagas tell of his countless battles. Thor shattering the skull of Hrungnir with Mjolnir after the giant had barged into Asgard itself, or dueling the monstrous Geirröd, who hurled molten iron at him, only to have Thor fling it back through his body. Each tale paints the same picture: Thor, the unstoppable force holding the line between order and chaos. But among these stories, one stands above the rest: the day Thor went fishing for Jörmungandr. This is no mere fireside tale. This is the moment when Thor came closer than ever to fulfilling his destiny. The story begins when Thor paid a visit to Hymir, a giant who lived by the sea. Hymir was powerful and grim, a keeper of cauldrons vast enough to brew ale for all of the gods. Thor wanted that cauldron to host a feast in Asgard, and after a tense exchange Hymir agreed, but not before testing Thor's courage. The two went fishing together, rowing far out into the open sea. Hymir warned Thor not to row too far, for the waters beyond were the domain of terrible beasts. But Thor only smiled, setting his jaw, and rowed even farther, until the shore was no longer visible. Then he took out an ox's head, bait fit for no ordinary catch, and fixed it to his hook. With a heave he cast the line into the dark, churning water. For a long moment there was only silence. The waves lapped against the boat and Hymir's unease grew. Then suddenly the sea began to boil. Something massive was stirring below, something older than the gods themselves. The line went taut with a force so great that the boat lurched, nearly capsizing. Thor planted his feet, every muscle in his body straining as he hauled with all his might. And then, the surface broke. Jörmungandr erupted from the deep, his coils rising like hills, his body so long that it seemed to circle the entire world. His eyes blazed like molten gold and venom dripped from his fangs, hissing as it struck the sea. Thor roared in defiance, the storm answering his cry, and with one hand he held the line tight, pulling the serpent ever closer. With the other he reached for Mjolnir, lightning crackling around him. In that moment the world held its breath. Hymir, however, was terrified. He knew the prophecy. He knew that if Thor slew the serpent too soon, it could bring about Ragnarok before its appointed time. And so, just as Thor raised Mjolnir to strike, Hymir cut the line. The serpent vanished beneath the waves, the ocean roaring as though mocking Thor's fury. The god of thunder stood in the boat, his chest heaving, his beard dripping with seawater, Mjolnir still raised in his hand, but the moment had passed. Jörmungandr had escaped. Thor's rage was like the storm itself. He turned on Hymir, his eyes blazing, but the giant only trembled and begged him to let the matter rest. At last, Thor let out a roar so loud it rolled across the sea like thunder, and he struck Hymir's boat with his hammer, shattering it into pieces. Thor waded back to shore, still clutching Mjolnir, the waves parting before him as though they feared to touch him. The tale of that fishing trip spread quickly across the 9 realms. The giants whispered of it with dread, for it meant that Thor and the World Serpent had finally crossed paths. The gods of Asgard took it as an omen, a sign that Ragnarok was drawing nearer. And Thor himself never forgot that moment. Somewhere in the depths, Jörmungandr still waited. But Thor's life was not all storm and battle. For all his ferocity, he was also known for his booming laughter, his love of feasting, and his loyalty to his friends. The people of Midgard loved him not because he was perfect but because he was dependable. When you heard thunder, you knew Thor was near, and that meant you were safe, at least for another day. And yet, fate is relentless. The Norns weave their threads and even the gods cannot cut them. The day that Thor had been warned of, the day that all the Aesir had feared, will one day come. On that day the sky will darken, and the great wolf skull will finally devour the sun. The earth will tremble, mountains will fall, and the seas will rise as Jörmungandr rides and thrashes, breaking free from his ancient coil. The giants will march, led by Surtur of Muspelheim, who carries a sword of flame so bright it will set the world ablaze. Heimdall will sound the Gjallarhorn, calling the gods to battle, and the final war, Ragnarok, will begin. Thor will take his place on the battlefield, Mjolnir in hand, his red beard gleaming like fire. He will seek out Jörmungandr, and the two will clash with a fury that shakes the heavens. Lightning will split the sky as Thor rains blow after blow on the serpent, and at last, with a final earth-shattering strike, he will slay the beast. But victory will come at a cost. Thor will take only 9 steps before the venom of the serpent overwhelms him. He will collapse, Mjolnir slipping from his hand, and the god of thunder will die. The protector of gods and men, the defender of Midgard, will fall, but not before ensuring that his enemy is destroyed. The poets of the Viking age told this story not as a tragedy, but as a kind of triumph. For Thor's death is not meaningless. It is the death of a god who gave everything to keep the world safe for as long as possible, who faced down chaos itself and did not flinch. It is a death that buys time, for from the ashes of Ragnarok, a new world will rise, green and beautiful, and Thor's sons will inherit Mjolnir and carry on his work. There is something profoundly human in this vision of a god who fights knowing he will lose, but who fights anyway. Thor is not a god of distant perfection. He is a god who sweats, who bleeds, who rages, who laughs. He is a god who stands on the front lines and dares the universe to break him. And perhaps that is why he still captures our imagination today. When the storm rolls in and the clouds blacken, when thunder shakes the ground beneath your feet, it is easy to see Thor riding overhead, his goats pulling the chariot, Mjolnir raised as lightning dances around him. The storm is fierce, but it is also comforting. Because if Thor is out there, then someone is still standing guard, someone is still holding back the giants for one more day. And so, the next time you hear thunder, remember that it is not just noise. It is a reminder of courage, of defiance, of a god who never backed down. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into the story of Thor, the god of thunder, give this video a like, share it with someone who loves mythology, and tell me in the comments which Norse tale you'd like to explore next. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because we've only just begun to tell the sagas of the Aesir, and there are more battles, more prophecies, and more mysteries waiting to be uncovered.